Cinema is an artistic medium with a ton of perceived rules. There's a lot of stuff that commonly gets taught and practiced because they are admittedly pretty helpful in telling a story through this medium. It's basic things like show, don't tell, don't break the fourth wall. If you're gonna cut, make it motivated. If you're filming dialogue, don't angle the camera past 180 degrees. If you have Tom Cruise in your movie, you have to have a scene of him running. Now that's just to name a few. But a lot of these rules get broken. And pretty often, it actually ends up not ruining a movie, but instead, making it way more interesting. A lot of us viewers have come to admire scenes that have no dialogue at all. No cuts at all. Movies that let you know you're watching a movie. What I want to talk about in this series of videos are some movies that break so much conventions of what we think are fundamental to movies that we end up asking if what we are watching is even a movie at all. These are films that push the boundaries of what we think this art form can be, and most of them can be watched through links in the description below. I think this will be really helpful for creative people who try to look for ways to maneuver around conventional expectations when you're starting to make art. But if you're really just into movies, then I'm sure there's something new here that you'll learn about, and it would hopefully open up a ton of new doors into stranger types of movies and newer ways of appreciating them. I'm gonna start with some simple avant-garde films that have some recognition, stuff that just go a different direction from mainstream standards of filmmaking. But throughout these videos, I will try to go further and further in that direction, based on a specific element that I'll be talking about. I'll even be covering films that combine more and more of these absent elements. It'll kinda be like an iceberg series in that sense, so let's start small. And by small, I mean with the actual scope and duration of a film. There is no essentiality with a film's runtime. The discourse surrounding films being over 90 minutes long or over 3 hours long is probably just a symptom of the commodification of cinema and making people desire their money's worth for a ticket. Movies don't have to be in theaters to be movies, right? They don't even have to be commercial products to be movies. So of course they don't have to be of a certain length to be a movie. Almost everything I will talk about in these videos will be disregarding all of these rigid commercial standards. I think short films are great. I can confidently say that I even personally prefer them over those films of feature length. I think they have just as much potential to create a meaningful effect on a viewer. They aren't just practice or stepping stones before a filmmaker can make a feature, which the public would then call their first movie. In the end, it's pretty difficult to draw the line where a short ends and a complete film begins, if we're just talking pure form. A movie could be seen as a compilation of shorter movies. This is actually a dynamic seen in the approach that David Lynch recommends to filmmakers. If you make 70 cool scenes and just kinda put them together, you have a film. Lynch is the most popular filmmaker who is often given the avant-garde label. He's brought up the idea of surrealism into movies that get pretty widespread appeal. He is beloved for these scenes you would likely never see in a typical Hollywood product, and he's made his fair share of shorts as well. I suggest you check him out. When people get into avant-garde cinema, it usually starts with these types of works. Short films that often throw these key elements out: dialogue and typical narrative logic. These are huge staples of the medium in general that we've been accustomed to our whole lives. So it is still quite jarring to open yourself up to the lack of it. The starter film for this, of course, is Un Chien Andalou, which is a collaboration by Salvador Dali and Louis Buñuel, two people who are gigantic figures in the field of surrealism. It's composed as a series of dreams and follows only that type of nonsensical logic. Film was thought to be the closest medium that can replicate dreams. So it uses the abilities of editing and imagery in order to create that experience. I like other early surrealists like Man Ray, who is a Dadaist and does more abstract stuff, and approaches making films with a lot of experimentation with camera technology to create new types of images and basing films from poems. I like Jean Cocteau, who also made films with the logic of poetry, often working with mythic imagery, and is definitely out there when it comes to inventing formal spectacles with that. Maya Deren has been greatly influential in this field, especially her work Meshes of the Afternoon, which I would say is one of the best intros to avant-garde cinema. It also follows dreamy logic, focusing on creating striking images and movements with very limited resources. Though if we really want to strip films down, then we should follow through with the lack of dialogue and straightforward narrative by removing any spectacular sequences and keep barely any notable actions. In fact, why don't we also just focus on as few characters as possible and have the film set in minimal set pieces too? We could maybe even do without much movement, editing, or music. This is what happens in Jeanne Dillman by Chantal Akerman. That's a shortcut of the title. This is the full one. The movie follows a single character in her house, living her daily life. That includes long scenes of doing chores and what a lot of people would refer to as nothing. It's a really bold move that has not only become an essential piece of feminist cinema, but also became very influential with the slow cinema movement. It is also referred to as transcendental cinema or contemplative cinema. There's a lot of YouTube videos about this already, so I don't want to go too deep into it right now. I only mention it because the movement does embody this approach to filmmaking with minimalism. They intentionally create these scenes people would call boring, in a way that somehow invites the viewer to be the one to lean in and watch actively. Check out the classic works of Robert Bresson, Vittorio De Sica, and Yasujiro Ozu for filmmaking that withhold grand set pieces, emotional gestures, affective music, and a strong sense of plot. Of course, I have to mention Lav Diaz, whose film I talked about in my first ever video. He's one of the most renowned slow cinema artists today. The most minimal thing he's done though might be the scene in Melancholia. It's a couple of characters sitting quietly in the dark, and then that's pretty much it. And it goes on for around 20 minutes straight. And it's a good scene, though much more fulfilling when you watch it in the context of the whole 8-hour film. Slow cinema is all about creating palpable absence in order to inspire newer ways of seeing and emoting that most other films would not permit. Movies can be 8 hours long and still be great works of art. They can be 8 seconds long and be just as effective for someone. Films can come in all shapes and sizes, and it's best to come at them with an open mind. Now, all of these minimalist films are cool. They result in some interesting stories and refreshing ways of telling them. But those stories still resemble what we think about as stories when we talk about movies. I want to talk about films that not only ignore the typical plot structures like the hero's journey or the 3-act structure, but instead attempt to question even the notion that making a movie has to do with crafting a plot at all. In the next episode, we'll be talking about movies without scripts. See you all there.